speed to power, getting as much data center capacity online as quickly as possible, making progress with the AI technology. Those are their priorities. That's what everyone is worrying about most at the moment.
Which is all led by a market, us, you and me, that says that we want low carbon energy, but actually what I really want is like a chatbot that's going to help me rewrite a recipe or something.
Am I optimistic? Would I be reasonably positive about the impact of AI in general on the energy sector? I think that the answer is yes, I would be.
Positive within reason is also like energy transition in terms of vagueness of language. I like that. I'm gonna start using that. Welcome back to the Interchange Recharged. It's a new year. It's the first episode of the year, and it is my first episode, really. As a reminder, my name is Bridget Van Dorsten. I'm an interim host before Sylvia's back by the end of summer. And today I'm joined by a very special guest, my fellow woodmaker, a podcast idol, Ed Crooks. Welcome to the show.
Hi, well, thank you very much. Thanks very much for those very kind words. Thanks for having me on the show. Great to see you. Great to be on the Interchange for a change. And many congratulations on getting this job, as you say, temporarily in Sylvia's absence. But it's going to be great. I'm sure very much looking forward to hearing the shows you're going to do.
For those that don't know Ed already, Ed is a host for another WoodMac podcast called The Energy Gang, which is a little bit more news-centric than the Interchange Recharged. And so given that, I thought that today's episode, which is really a crossover episode between the two podcasts, gives us an opportunity to look at where 2025 left us for the year ahead. So, Ed, you are at WoodMac, the author of The Energy Pulse, which is a weekly column highlighting the biggest news stories, and then the Energy Gang podcast, where you dive into those news stories and discuss their impact on industry with well-known energy experts. Can you maybe tell the audience a little bit more about your experience in the energy industry and your career thus far, whether it be in or out of podcasting?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's slightly weird always, this experience when I come on the Interchange Recharged. This is exactly the question that I always ask the guests that we have on the Energy Gang, which is, tell us a bit about your career and how you got here. So I'm just having to make that little mental adjustment to actually be answering the question myself. So, I mean, my background is in journalism very largely and in economics. I did an economics degree and worked as an economist for a little bit. And I was an economics journalist at the BBC for a while. I was on BBC Radio quite a bit. So this has been really nice actually to get into podcasting. It's very much sort of back to my roots in that sense. And then I worked at the Financial Times for a long time. And when I did that, I sort of transferred over, started off there writing about economics, transferred to energy fairly soon in my time there. That was what I was doing when I joined WoodMac. So it has been, as I say, really nice working on the Energy Gang, doing things like writing the Energy Pulse newsletter. It's kind of brings together all the different parts of my career, that sort of journalistic aspect of things. Talking to you on shows like this one is something I really enjoy doing. And so I'm going to ask you that question I always ask everyone. What is your background then? How did you get to this position you now have at WoodMac and doing this here for the Interchange Recharged?
So I've always been doing engineering by trade, by academics. And I started out within the hydrogen industry as an operations engineer for a couple of different hydrogen refueling stations, which are really just gas stations for hydrogen, refueling passenger vehicles, both in California and then in Europe. And during my time there, I felt a little bit skeptical about the application of hydrogen into cars, but I was really fascinated by the molecule itself and its potential to contribute to the energy transition. So I applied to WoodMac and then came to really explore hydrogen more, but within the broader context of the energy transition, looking at techno-economics more broadly, supply chain, etc. And I've been doing this role now for about 6 years, and it's been really lovely. However, hydrogen does have its ups and downs, and maybe right now we're in a down, hence the interest in doing this podcast and getting to expand my horizons a bit more.
A lot to talk about, certainly. Still an enormous amount of change happening. You have definitely a fantastic agenda, fantastic field to draw on in terms of people out there doing really exciting, significant things that are absolutely going to change the world of energy in the years to come.
Yeah, thanks. And we'll dive into each one of those. I'm sure you have a lot to say. But maybe we can start with the last one first, just to make sure that we end on more of a positive note. So starting with fossil fuels, I was just in North Carolina celebrating my grandfather's 100th birthday. Shout out to my grandfather, Hank. But it's really
fantastic. Yeah, congratulations to him. Yeah, that's great.
But it's really hard to conceptualize for me, what 100 years of life looks like. And whenever I spend time with him, I always, think back, wow, 1920s. And from an energy perspective, that's when the US was really exerting energy dominance, but as an economic and an industrial power with oil from American soil, with American companies. And it seems like, especially with some of the latest news on Venezuela, the US appears to be reorienting a bit towards energy domination via a more perhaps explicit geopolitical policy, which I feel like must have been or still is perhaps a huge topic of conversation on the Energy Gang. What have your discussions been like?
Yes, I mean, you're right. It's been a big topic of discussion for us already. We just published actually our most recent show, which is our look ahead to 2026 on the Energy Gang. It clearly reflects an energy dominance agenda on the part of the United States. I think the thing that I find most striking about it, though, is that it also fits into the broader economic strategy of the Trump administration in this sense, which is that clearly an important factor behind President Trump's election in 2024 was concern about the cost of living. Although inflation had come down a lot, people still very much felt the impact of the inflation under the Biden administration that followed the end of COVID in particular. And cost of living was a big concern for people, and it remains a big concern for people. And so when you think about what levers the administration can pull to bring down the cost of living for people, actually lower oil prices is an important part of that. And anything that can be done to drive down oil prices, both because people really notice the price of gasoline at the pump, and also because price of oil has a big knock-on effect on inflation right through the economy. And so if you want to get inflation down, if you want to reduce the cost of living, if you want to get inflation down so that you can give the Federal Reserve room to cut interest rates more, you want a lower price of oil. On balance, for political reasons, having lower oil prices is better. So that, I think, is going to be an important thing to think about. And there may be other ways, I think, in which you'll see that start to be reflected in the administration's strategy, the way they think about oil and the way they think about energy in general. Why is the Trump administration rejecting discussion of climate change, rejecting the idea that they should be concerned about emissions and so on? Answer crucially because they want to focus on energy affordability, rejecting anything that puts upward pressure on energy costs, including shifts to lower carbon technologies where they are more expensive, as the administration would argue they generally are. Obviously, we can debate whether that is actually the case, and clearly in some cases lower carbon technologies may be lower cost, but still, that issue of affordability, I think it's fair to say, is right at the top of the administration's agenda. And other issues are important in terms of energy security, the reliability of energy supplies, and so on. But when you think about, watching the administration's decisions and what they're going to be doing in the future, I think it's worth always having in mind the idea that affordability will be their lodestar.
Am I right to maybe conclude as well that the Trump administration's climate ambitions are pretty solely focused on affordability, and through that, hydrocarbons, because it's legacy infrastructure, because it's cheap, because we already have all of that scale, and therefore other changes like the One Big Beautiful Bill, kind of rolling back a lot of those policy regulations, supporting renewables, it just goes hand in hand with this kind of increase in investment and priority for hydrocarbons.
Exactly that. Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right. That I think, the case would be made that framework of subsidies under the Inflation Reduction Act, both was very costly in terms of foregone tax revenue and also supported investment in energy sources that are actually more expensive than relying on fossil fuels.
So fossil fuels goes hand in hand with increasing energy affordability, increasing energy security. But I also feel like there is resilience that new technologies can provide within the transition that we're in now, especially relating to energy storage and dispatchable power that can then flex to meet peak loads. What technologies are you watching, Ed, that could really genuinely provide that firm, flexible power at scale? And are we talking 2 to 3 years or 2 to 3 decades, or is it, as it is with everything, solely dependent on cost?
Well, the whole outlook for power globally, and particularly in the United States, is being transformed by AI and the data centers needed to support innovations in AI. And we're moving in the US from this position where we had flat power demand basically for 20 years, and it's already started to kick up, and we're going to expect it to continue to grow very significantly over the years to come. And so that's a fantastic spur to innovation. It's much easier to get new ideas adopted and to grow in a growing market than it is in a stagnant market where you're essentially having to use the new technologies to replace the old ones that you're retiring. And so that's the context for a lot of interesting ideas, I think having a lot of potential. In terms of the things I'm particularly interested in, there's probably kind of 3 main areas that I will be particularly focusing on. One is storage. There has been this massive boom in terms of installations of lithium-ion battery systems. This is going to be a big year, I think, for Form Energy. We were just talking about this on the Energy Gang just now. This is the company producing iron-air batteries, which is one of the most promising forms of long-duration storage. Typically, a lithium-ion battery system might have storage for 4 hours. They're talking about storage that can last for 100 hours. And so opens up a set of very different use cases. Their first commercial project is expected to be fully operational this year. Then you have the dispatchable low carbon technologies, which are particularly suited to sources of demand that generally need 24/7 operation or something like it, such as data centers, and come on to the qualifications at that point in a moment. But let's just, in the first instance, say that data centers are typically looking for reliable round-the-clock operation. And those technologies, things like geothermal power, things like nuclear power, both new nuclear in the sense of advanced technologies, the new generation of small modular reactors, and in the sense of typically known as Generation 3 plus reactors, big ones like the AP1000 produced by Westinghouse. Those are technologies that are supported by the Trump administration. They haven't fallen foul of the skepticism of low-carbon energy that is generally prevalent in the administration because they are dispatchable and reliable. So I think that's the crucial difference the Trump administration is really trying to insist on, which is not the difference between high carbon and low carbon, but the difference between reliable dispatchable technologies, which could be fossil or low carbon, and variable intermittent technologies like wind and solar. And then the third would be things like, broadly speaking, under the heading of grid enhancing technologies, working out when the grid is under strain and providing support when the grid needs it. Again, going back to points about the kind of the big picture in terms of what are the priorities. Affordability, when can you keep costs down? When can you use technology to avoid spending on expensive infrastructure? When will generation technologies actually have lower costs on an integrated system basis than existing fossil fuels or the wind and solar. Again, energy security and reliability being hugely important. What will energy technologies do to support the reliability of the grid, improve resilience, enhance energy security? All those kind of things are the characteristics for energy technologies that are going to lead to success, I think, certainly for a few years now, rather than anything related to emissions and carbon.
Absolutely. And I think you summed it up perfectly right there at the end. But it sounds like you were kind of saying at the beginning of what you were talking about there, Ed, that any of these technologies could get commercialized through data center demand first and then scale down in cost for everyone else, which I think is a interesting point, because I feel as if the energy transition is being a little bit economically and politically outcompeted by AI and data centers in this battle for capital, grid access, political priority, which is all led by a market, us, you and me, that says that we want low carbon energy, but actually what I really want is like a chatbot that's going to help me rewrite a recipe or something. At least that's what I use it for. So I guess, what do you think? How far away is the potential of having AI give a positive impact on decarbonization? Is that AI or data centers accelerating the cost reduction of new technologies just wishful thinking?
Yeah, I certainly think the potential is there, as you say. One of the concepts that people talk about a lot is the bit-watt spread. In other words, the value that you can get from IT operations compared to the cost of power. And in terms of AI and data center operations, that spread potentially could be vast if AI really is transformational, if it is going to be the thing that makes every aspect of our lives different in the future, then that is a very, very high value use of power. And as you say, when you talk about the AI industry kind of out-competing everybody else for capital and technology and for power, that's the reason, isn't it? The other thing just to throw in is that AI can also be a contributor on the supply side to innovation in energy. A lot of the things that companies are thinking about in terms of grid management, advanced power flow control, all those kind of things are made a lot easier by AI type technologies, really rely on AI and perhaps not in the sort of sense that's become popular in the last few years, not in generative AI, large language models, anything like that, but machine learning type applications are also very, very important in energy supply. And it's clear we still haven't yet seen the full impact of that revolution work through the industry. So that's another area to watch. So bottom line, am I optimistic? Would I be reasonably positive about the impact of AI in general on the energy sector? I think that the answer is yes, I would be.
Okay. Positive within reason is also like energy transition in terms of vagueness of language. I like that. I'm gonna start using that.
Well, indeed. Even as I was saying it, I was thinking about I'm certainly, the one thing people are not going to do is to volunteer to be unreasonably positive. But as I say, I think there are reasonable grounds for optimism.
I think you're right. And maybe one of the fears that I have, or maybe it's just an uncertainty, and my subconscious doesn't like change or something. But it's mostly that the industry narrative so far. I think within reason, it's relatively new, but the industry narrative has been, don't worry about AI's emissions. All of these companies, they want low carbon energy. AI is going to help us solve climate change. I think it's not like overstating, but I think it's just that we don't really know. We don't really know what the carbon cost of using AI is. And I don't think we've done the math or determined what that tipping point would have to be in order to prove that carbon savings outweigh the consumption, whether that be in an AI process, helping optimize one vertical of renewable energy production or consumption or whatever it might be. It feels quite unknown. And it's a huge investment to place up front, not understanding how big of an impact it will potentially have either on energy consumption, carbon emissions, energy savings, on all of the above, really.
Yeah, 100%. I definitely agree with that. And I also think it is absolutely true and should not be misunderstood that carbon is nobody's priority, certainly nobody's number one priority in the tech industry right now. Speed to power, getting as much data center capacity online as quickly as possible, making progress with the AI technology, those are their priorities. That's what everyone is worrying about most at the moment. Carbon is somewhere in the mix and may increasingly become an important factor in the future, and definitely has not been forgotten. And as I say, there's clear evidence of that in the support from these tech companies for a lot of low carbon technologies, but it is definitely not at the top of their agenda.
I agree, and I couldn't thank you for a better transition into the end here, Ed. I think this goes well into like what the next episode for the Interchange Recharged is going to be, which is welcoming Bloom Energy to kind of talk about their success over the past year and their technology. If you don't know them, it was a small company where they basically had a 1 megawatt pilot scale project back in 2015 that's been operating since then, a solid oxide fuel cell running on natural gas, to this year, major interest from companies like Oracle now looking to deploy them and their technology at gigawatt scale AI facilities because of the gas turbine supply chain shortage, and because their technology offers another solution to not only producing power, speed to power, but also uses natural gas, has the ability to use other kind of low carbon or green fuels in the future. And I think that what we were talking about earlier, their technology is the kind of bridge technology that could be deployed in data centers to get fast deployment now with fuels that we have now, carbon not being a priority, using natural gas now, but with a pathway to lower carbon or even zero carbon in the future. So I suppose my final question for you, Ed, would be, what do you think we should be asking Bloom Energy, or perhaps even asking more about gas turbine supply chain, alternative technologies, etc., on the upcoming episode?
Well, it's been really fascinating what's been happening to them over the past couple of years. I think it's really great that you've got them on the show, because I'm going to be very, very interested to hear what they've got to say. I think my big question for them would be about scaling up. As you say, they've had this relatively small scale project for a long time. They've been looking at a number of different things. There's been a lot of activity going on. What they have not done is grown to that gigawatt, multiple gigawatt scale that you're talking about as being the potential now that they're facing. And as we've seen from many companies in the past, that transition from megawatt scale to gigawatt scale can often be very challenging. Just going back also to our earlier discussion about AI and energy, and this is something I think you could probably put to Bloom, although they're not right at the heart of it, but it definitely has big implications for them, is the question of, are we in a bubble? As I say, I was talking earlier about the huge potential of AI. The potential is undoubtedly there. It's certainly something that is going to change the world in all kinds of ways, some of which we can see coming already, some of which we haven't even imagined yet. But that is a rather different question from saying, will all the investments pay off? Will it be commercially successful? Will the revenue be there to justify all the spending on data center infrastructure in general, and obviously for our purposes, what we care about in energy in particular? It's quite interesting, I think, to think about the analogies to the financial industry in the kind of 2000s leading up to 2008 financial crisis and the crash and recession that followed that. While the bubble's being inflated, it's really hard to take a dispassionate look at it and say, there are risks here. There's a famous quote from somebody about, as long as the music's playing, we're going to keep dancing. Slightly has that feel, I think, in the AI energy nexus at the moment of the music's still playing, we're going to keep dancing. What happens if and when the music stops? I think that's going to be one of the issues that will absolutely dominate discussion in 2026, again, as it did to an extent in 2025. And the longer this goes on, I think the more the potential for some kind of sharp correction increases. Not saying it's going to happen this year. I'm not going to say it's happened at all for definite, but I definitely think the risk is there.
While today's episode certainly gives a flavor for what I'd like to talk about in future episodes absolutely will go into more detail about specific topics with energy experts in those fields. As I mentioned, the next one will be with Bloom Energy, talking specifically about data centers and how their technology is able to flex and meet load, but also scale up with demand, as Ed mentioned, within this bubble that we could be experiencing for AI.
Yeah, as I say, really looking forward to that. I always think that the particular strength of the Interchange Recharged as a show is your ability to do these deep dives, to get really into a particular company, a particular technology, a particular issue, to get very, very granular in detail about what you're talking about. And that's fantastic. I think it's a great education, learn an enormous amount from the show. I've learned an enormous amount from it. Well, it seems that Sylvia's been doing it, and very much looking forward to listening and doing the same, learning a lot from you in the months to come. Well,
thanks, Ed. And I appreciate you joining me on my first episode with the Interchange Recharged. And I thought I'd ask before you go if you have any podcasting tips for me. How'd I do?
I have nothing to teach you. It's been fantastic. No, I mean, I don't know. The thing I've always thought about for the Energy Gang, the thing we've always tried to do is build on a review I once read. And this is a review of the old Energy Gang. The show was launched by Jigger Shah, Stephen Lacey, Catherine Hamilton, a fantastic show when they were all doing it. And somebody said in a review, which I thought was a really perceptive way to talk about it, they said, it's like you're at a conference, and in the lunch break at the conference, everyone kind of gets there, they line up for the food and then take their food and sit at different tables. And during that lunch, there's a group of really smart, well-informed, interesting, entertaining people sitting at the next table, and you get a chance to eavesdrop on their conversation. And that's what it's like listening to the Energy Gang. And that's always been my goal, my lodestar, of thinking about what we should be doing with the Energy Gang. Interchange Recharge is somewhat different because you are doing these deep dives. You're able to go into that really granular detail. But still, I think that's a really great principle, which is the private conversations that people would have, the way people would talk about their businesses, their sectors, their technologies. What you are going to be able to do is bring those to the public to give people a real understanding of how these things work, where they're going, what they're facing in the future, what their challenges are, how they're addressing those challenges. And that, I think, is just incredibly valuable. So, as I say, I don't really feel like I've got a lot to teach you, but if I was going to say one thing about what makes a good podcast and what people ought to bear in mind when they are podcasting, I think that's a really great way to think about it.
That is a really excellent way to think about it, especially for me, who's like a very visual person, and I love going to conferences, and the lunch is the best part. So that's a great way. Yeah, thank you for that.
Very true. Yeah.
Thank you for the wise piece of advice, and thank you for joining me on the show today, Ed.
Well, thank you very much for having me on. It's been great talking to you.
If you're looking for more Interchange Recharged or more of the Energy Gang, you can find us wherever you get your favorite podcasts at. Until next time.